If you're watching this when this uploads, we don't yet know the champions of the soccer world. If you're watching this after the 2022 World Cup, you will have that knowledge of the future, like a wise cyborg sage. One thing's for sure though, they are hollow champions, fake victors, faux winners. No, this is nothing to do with the shady nature of the Qatar World Cup and its corruptness and flat-out disregard of human rights. No, it's because you can't be champion until you've beaten the real world champs. That is the Hurricanes, because their championship spirit is here to stay. At least that's what the song says. The Hurricanes! Sounds very wheezy. The Hurricanes was produced by Dick... No, stop laughing, you're better than this. Dick Entertainment, and was a half-hourly show comprising of 65 animated episodes that ran from 1993 to 1997. When I say they ran from 1993 to 1997, I don't mean like constantly. The Hurricanes channel would be a mad flex though. It was part made by Scottish Television Enterprises and became syndicated in the States, but shown on ITV in the UK. It tells the story of a recently orphaned heiress of a football team called Amanda Carey, and follows her efforts as she seeks to make the Hurricanes become champions of world soccer by beating famous clubs from around the world. None of them are real clubs though, unless Standish Park Rangers had secretly been dominating the Premier League throughout the 1990s. Amanda and her head coach Jock Stone, based on Celtic FC's Jock Stein, have assembled an international squad of their own, with broad stereotypes making up the roster, all with one main personality trait, because 90s cartoons are always going to be putting minimum effort into their scripts. Do you want to know how 1990s this is? Their enemies, the Garco's Gorgons, play in a volcano. Yes, that wouldn't pass health and safety muster these days, would it? US Gold acquired the license and released 3 games on 3 formats, which, while they look quite similar, are actually 3 different games. The premise is largely the same. You have to kick a soccer ball at wildlife until they die. Arc Developments handled the Sega versions on the Game Gear and the Megadrive, while the Super Nintendo version was developed by our old chums at Probe. All 3 were definite Twilight titles on their respective formats, coming out in late 1994. I'm afraid my usual format of putting reviews of the games at the end of the episode has been stopped in its tracks like a scything tackle from Virgil van Dijk. Put simply, there weren't any reviews in the major publications of this game when it came out. I think possibly because the Hurricanes cartoon wasn't a huge hit in the States, and so they never even released the Sega versions of it anywhere other than Europe. And the Super Nintendo version, while that did get released, wasn't a huge seller over there either, because it's about proper football, isn't it? It's a shame that the Americans didn't get to experience the Sega versions of it, as they are a little bit superior, in my opinion, to the programmed Super Nintendo version. But more on that in a minute. They're ostensibly all very similar games with the same plot. The Garco's Gorgons, those dudes who hang around playing football in a volcano like a bunch of wally-chopped buffoons, have challenged our heroic Hurricanes to a friendly charity match to see who is the best in the world. Only they've nobbled the Hurricanes' method of transport, so they can't get to that volcano very easily. The Gorgons' plans is that the Hurricanes won't be able to turn up, so they'll look like both cowdy custards and a bunch of people that hate children with like ingrowing hands or whatever charity is being supported. What awful PR that would be for the Hurricanes. So instead of taking the team coach, the players will walk across various continents so that they can play this football match and save face and prove that they are indeed the best soccer team in the world. And they'll do it while dressed in full kit like a bunch of full kit wankers. And yes, as I previously mentioned, they will be assaulting wildlife by kicking footballs at them. Gee, I sure hope that charity match wasn't for abused monkeys. So yes, fans of Soccer Kid and Marko's Magic Football will find a familiar theme here. It is a soccer-based platformer. But let's not forget to mention also those who are aware of the underrated platform puzzler Go-Go Beckham Adventure on Soccer Island on the Game Boy Advance, a game I have covered. Go check that out at that link, but wait until you've watched this video. So yes, you're an athlete, and by cracky you're going to use your soccer ball to protect yourself from soccer-hating creatures, fauna and thugs, or you'll die trying. I would say personally that the Hurricanes game is better than Soccer Kid or Marko's Magic Football, but maybe your opinion differs. It's certainly not better than Go-Go Beckham though. Controlling your football as a weapon changes dependent on the version you're playing. But the Sega version's simplified button scheme see it take an early lead over its Super Nintendo equivalent. The SNES makes full use of its extra buttons, but I'm not sure it should have done. Sometimes its button scheme gets a bit confusing in the heat of the moment. The Game Gear and Megadrive versions have you press up and down along with the shoot button to choose the height of your kick, and it's far more intuitive. The Sega version also has less slippery inertia on its Pro tags, and it's a fair amount easier to control your footballer on those tiny little platforms than its programmed stablemate. With that said, all three versions struggle with the game's main issue, the very vertically large levels, giving you a fair amount of freedom to get from A to B, which is a good thing, but a bad thing about it is that you sometimes have to do massive, huge, enormous blind jumps into the abyss, and you might well end up on a spike, or even worse, in a big hole and lose one of your very limited lives. The game is a tough challenge already. It could have done without this. The Super Nintendo version is not quite as visually interesting as the Sega versions either, lacking the level of variety and stages of its Sega brothers. The Mega Drive version really has a very clear connection to the source material cartoon itself, with cutscenes of non-playable characters, and also has a larger roster to select from. The SNES version has just two, Cal Casey and Napper Thompson, whereas the Mega Drive version has 4 players to choose from. And yes, in all versions the characters play exactly the same, but it's nice to have the choice. Given that these games came out at a similar time, it looks more like Probe rushed its homework than Arc Developments did. Oh, and if you're wondering how many characters are in the Game Gear one, it's just one, but God bless it, it's only little. Give it a break. The Hurricanes in all 3 versions is perhaps a little bit too European platformer for my taste. Indeed, the Game Gear version won't let you finish its levels until you've collected enough stuff. A very typically Euro platformer stance to take. But it's not a terrible Euro platformer. In fact, it's pretty good fun, and even though the Super Nintendo one isn't on a par with the Mega Drive and Game Gear versions, it's still a solid 6 out of 10. It's never going to supplant your Mario, your Sonic, your Donkey Kong or your Rise Star cartridges in the console slot, but it's a fun little platformer all the same. You'll probably be playing it for about as long as Saudi Arabia are playing football in the 2022 World Cup, which I'm going to go out on a limb and say is about 4.5 hours. So yes, please give the Hurricanes a go. Next time out, and we're still unfortunately suffering from World Cup fever, someone get the doctor. But this time we're going to test out our brains and try and impress Kirsty Gallagher in Sky Sports Football Quiz. I'm sure she'll swoon over our knowledge of Matt Busby and Hertha Berlin. Notice me, Kirsty. Notice me. Notice me. I know about Faustino Espria. Like, subscribe, and K thanks, bye.